Beach houses are supposed to be escapes from reality, but sometimes they become something far worse. Eleanor heard breathing inside her walls that matched no living rhythm. Violet watched her grandchildren speak to reflections that shouldn't exist. Sophia found a diary predicting her own death, written months before she arrived. Sebastian's neighbor knew things about him that no one could possibly know. Jack discovered a basement filled with decades of lost memories. Eliana's photographs captured faces watching her sleep. Daniel's family walked into a house that had been waiting for them their entire lives. Tonight you'll hear all 7 of their stories, and you'll understand why some places choose their visitors. If you're ready for encounters that will stay with you long after the video ends, subscribe to Mysterious Clicks and turn on notifications so you never miss what we uncover next. Let's begin with Sebastian's neighbor. Knew things about him that no one could possibly know. My wife Margaret and I have wintered at the same beach house for 15 years. We're creatures of habit. She and I retired educators, both of us, and we find comfort in routine. Every November through February, we leave Boston and settle into our rented cottage on the Maine coast. The owner is an absentee landlord who lives in Florida, and he's content to have reliable tenants who pay on time and don't cause trouble. It's an arrangement that has suited us perfectly, until this year when we met the neighbor. He appeared the second day of our stay. I was bringing groceries in from the car when he materialized at the end of our driveway. A man in his 70s perhaps, dressed in clothes slightly too formal for the casual beach environment. He introduced himself as Mr. Peterson and said he lived in the grey house just down the road. He welcomed us warmly and asked if we needed anything. I thanked him and said we were quite settled. He nodded, smiled, and mentioned that Margaret must be pleased I'd remembered to get her blood pressure medication this time, since we'd forgotten it last year. I felt ice run through my veins. We had forgotten her medication last year, had to call our pharmacy in Boston to transfer the prescription to a local pharmacy. But I'd never met this man before. I'd never mentioned it to anyone here. I stood there with the grocery bags, trying to find words, but he'd already walked away, whistling something classical that I couldn't quite place. I went inside and told Margaret. She frowned and suggested perhaps we'd mentioned it to the property owner and he'd told the neighbor. It seemed implausible, but I had no better explanation. We let it go. But the next morning, Mr. Peterson appeared at our door with a casserole dish. He said he'd made too much dinner and thought we might enjoy it. Margaret thanked him, charmed by the gesture. The casserole was chicken with rice and vegetables, prepared exactly the way Margaret's mother used to make it, with that specific combination of herbs that you can't find in any recipe book. It was her comfort food, something she'd told me she'd been craving just the night before. In our kitchen, in private, over the following days, Mr. Peterson kept appearing with precisely what we needed before we realized we needed it. Margaret mentioned in passing that she wanted to reread a specific novel, an obscure British mystery from the 1960s. 2 hours later, Mr. Peterson knocked on our door with that exact book, said he'd noticed it on his shelf and thought we might enjoy it. I began keeping notes, small tests. I would think about something without saying it aloud, wanting coffee instead of tea, wondering if we had enough firewood. Within hours, sometimes minutes, Mr. Peterson would appear with the exact item or solution. It was impossible. It was terrifying. I installed security cameras around the property without telling Margaret. I needed to understand how he was doing this. The footage from the first night made me physically ill. For 6 hours, from midnight until dawn, Mr. Peterson stood in our front yard, perfectly motionless, facing our bedroom window, not swaying, not shifting his weight, just standing there like a statue, staring at the house. I watched the time stomp tick forward, and he didn't move once. When dawn broke, he simply walked away, back toward his grey house down the road. I showed Margaret the footage. Her face went pale. She suggested we contact the police. I agreed. But first, I decided to visit his house. I needed to see where he lived, needed some concrete information to give the authorities. The grey house was only a quarter-mile down the coastal road. I walked there mid-morning, rehearsing what I'd say. But when I reached the property, I found it abandoned. Not recently abandoned, long-term abandoned. Windows broken, siding rotting, the yard overgrown with weeds that looked years old. There was mail scattered on the porch, and I picked up a few pieces, all addressed to Harold Peterson, all postmarked from 8 years ago. The most recent was a property tax notice marked Final Notice Estate of Harold Peterson. I went home and searched online. I found an obituary. Harold Peterson, aged 73, died in 2017. No surviving family. Estate sold to settle debts. But that was impossible because I'd spoken to him. I'd shaken his hand. Margaret had eaten his food. That evening, I confronted him when he appeared at our door with a bag of Margaret's favourite tea, the kind that has to be ordered from a specialty shop in Scotland. I told him I knew he was dead. I told him I'd seen his obituary. He looked at me with these calm, kind eyes and said, "Sebastian, you know that's not quite right. I'm not dead. I'm just very, very good at paying attention." He pushed past me into the house, and I was too shocked to stop him. He walked to our kitchen table where Margaret was sitting, and he placed the tea in front of her. Then he started speaking, but not in his voice. In her mother's voice. Her dead mother's voice, perfect in pitch and inflection, telling Margaret things only her mother could know. Private conversations from childhood, pet names, secrets. Margaret started crying, reaching for him, and he took her hands and continued speaking in that stolen voice, and I realized what he was. What he'd been doing all along. He'd been listening, not just to our words, but to our thoughts, our memories, our entire lives. And he was wearing them like clothes. I grabbed Margaret and pulled her away from him. His face didn't change, but the voice did. It cycled through voices I recognized. My father, my college roommate, my first principal, all dead, all speaking through this thing that looked like a helpful old man. I dragged Margaret out of the house and into our car. We drove straight to the police station in town and told them everything. They listened politely, took notes, and said they'd send someone to check on the property. We stayed at a hotel that night. The next morning, the police called. They said they'd investigated our beach house and found no signs of forced entry or disturbance. They'd also checked on the Peterson property, confirmed it had been abandoned since 2017. No evidence anyone had been living there. We went back to Boston the next day, forfeiting the rest of our winter rental. We didn't discuss what had happened. What could we say? But 3 weeks ago, we received a package. Inside were photos, dozens of them, showing Margaret and me inside our Boston home, eating breakfast, reading in bed, sleeping, all taken from inside the house, from angles that suggested the photographer had been standing in the room with us. On the back of one photo, written in elegant script, was a message. You're both so worried about the blood pressure medication. Don't be. I already picked it up for you. It's in your medicine cabinet. I'm always paying attention.
I rented the beach house for January, the cruelest month for a retired English teacher with too many books and too much silence. My husband passed 3 winters ago, and every year since, I've fled our empty Connecticut home for somewhere coastal and cold, where I can pretend the loneliness is just the season. The rental listing promised isolation, and it delivered. 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, perched on a cliff where the Atlantic throws itself against granite with rhythmic violence. Perfect for a woman who wanted to disappear into her own thoughts for 30 days. The first week passed in comfortable solitude. I'd wake at dawn, make coffee, and spend hours at the kitchen table with my laptop, finally working on the novel I'd promised myself I'd write. The house was old but well-maintained, one of those 1920s beach cottages that wealthy families used to summer in before the coast became crowded. High ceilings, wide plank floors, walls covered in that old-fashioned beadboard paneling. At night, I'd sit by the fireplace with a book, listening to the wind howl across the rocks, and I felt something close to peace. But on the 8th night, I noticed the breathing. It started as background noise, something I initially dismissed as the house settling or wind pushing through gaps in the siding. A rhythmic sound, steady and low, like someone drawing deep, measured breaths. In, out, in, out. I marked my page and sat very still, trying to locate the source. It seemed to come from the wall behind the sofa, the one that divided the living room from what the floor plan called a storage closet. I pressed my ear against the beadboard and heard it clearly. Not wind, not pipes. Something that sounded disturbingly organic, disturbingly deliberate. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Houses make noises, especially old ones battered by salt air and winter storms. I went to bed that night and tried to ignore the faint sound that seemed to follow me through the walls, always just at the edge of perception. But the next morning, I couldn't help myself. I opened the storage closet, expecting to find the source of some rational explanation. The space was narrow and deep, packed with the usual beach house debris, folded lawn chairs, deflated pool floats, boxes of seashells and driftwood. Nothing unusual, nothing that breathed, yet when I stood inside that closet the sound was louder, and it seemed to come from behind the back wall, from some space that shouldn't exist. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But that night, the breathing grew stronger. I could hear it from across the room now, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the pulse of the ocean outside, but was distinctly separate from it. In, out, and worse, I began to notice that the beadboard seemed to move ever so slightly with each breath, bulging outward by perhaps a millimeter, then receding. I sat on the sofa and watched that wall for 2 hours, mesmerized and horrified, until I finally grabbed my phone and did what any reasonable person would do. I recorded it. The next morning, in daylight, I played back the recording. The breathing was there, clear and unmistakable, captured in digital certainty. I wasn't losing my mind. Something was making that sound. I called a local contractor, explained I had concerns about the structure of the wall, and asked if he could come inspect it. He arrived that afternoon, a weathered man in his 60s who'd clearly seen every variety of beach house disaster. He listened to my recording without expression, then pulled out a thermal imaging camera from his truck. He said it would show if there were any air gaps or moisture issues behind the paneling. I watched him scan the wall systematically, his face growing increasingly tense. When he reached the section behind the sofa, he stopped. He scanned it again, slowly, then stepped back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He showed me the camera display. Behind the beadboard, in the space that should have been either solid wall or empty void, the thermal image showed something. Not a single mass, but a pattern of warmth, distributed in a way that looked almost vascular, like a network of heated channels running through the wall cavity. He asked me how long I'd noticed the sound. I told him 8 days. He packed up his equipment and told me he wouldn't open that wall. When I asked why, he said there were things that lived in old coastal houses, in the spaces between construction, and sometimes it was better to let sleeping things lie. I should have left then. Packed my bags, forfeited my deposit, driven back to Connecticut. But something kept me there. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or perhaps it was that terrible human curiosity that makes us press on bruises and pick at scabs. I wanted to know what was behind that wall. I needed to understand what was breathing in my temporary home. So that night, while a winter storm battered the coast and knocked out the power, I took a hammer and a flashlight and I opened the wall myself. The beadboard came away easily. Surprisingly so, as if it had been waiting to be removed. Behind it was a gap, about 6 inches deep, the space between the interior and exterior walls that should have been filled with insulation. But there was no insulation. Instead, there was something else. The flashlight beam revealed what looked like tunnels carved through the wooden framing, creating a network that ran vertically and horizontally through the wall structure. The wood inside these tunnels was smooth, worn down by something that had passed through repeatedly, and there was a smell. Organic and ancient, like turned earth and salt water mixed with something I couldn't identify, and then the breathing stopped. Completely. The house fell into a silence so profound it felt like a presence itself. I stood there with my hammer and flashlight, staring into those impossible tunnels, and I realized the breathing had stopped because whatever made it now knew it had been discovered. I heard movement then, not from the wall I'd opened, but from deeper inside the house, from the walls of the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. A shifting, rustling sound, like something large redistributing its weight through the hollow spaces that networked through the entire structure. The house wasn't just breathing. The house was occupied. I left everything. My laptop, my books, my clothes. I walked out into the storm and drove away in the dark, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I made it to a motel 20 miles down the coast and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the rental company and told them I'd had a family emergency and wouldn't be returning. They said they'd refund my remaining days after they inspected for damages. I never heard from them again. I tried calling twice, but the number went straight to voicemail and my emails bounced back. That was 3 months ago. I haven't tried to write my novel since then. I can't sit in quiet rooms anymore without listening to the walls. And sometimes, late at night in my Connecticut home, I press my ear against the plaster and I swear I can hear it. That same rhythmic breathing, faint but growing stronger. In, out, in, out. I tell myself I'm imagining it, that I brought the fear home with me, but not the thing itself. But yesterday, I noticed a crack in my bedroom wall, thin as a hair, that wasn't there before. And when I put my hand against it, I could feel the wall moving. Just slightly, just enough, breathing. I booked the beach house because I was losing my mind. 12 years as an ER nurse will do that to you. The pandemic broke something in me that never quite healed, and by last spring, I was having panic attacks in the supply closet and crying in my car between shifts. My supervisor suggested I take some time off. I had 3 weeks of vacation saved up, so I found the cheapest beach rental I could afford and drove there without telling anyone where I was going. I needed to be alone. I needed to not be responsible for anyone's life, even my own, for just a little while. The house was small and dated, but clean. The kind of place that gets rented by the week to people who can't afford the nicer properties. I didn't care. I dropped my bags in the bedroom and immediately went to take a shower, standing under the hot water until my skin turned pink. That's when I found the journal. It was tucked behind the bathroom mirror, which had come slightly loose from the wall. When I pushed the mirror back into place, the journal fell out and landed on the sink. Plain black composition notebook, the kind you buy at any drugstore. I opened it thinking it would be someone's vacation diary, maybe something sentimental they'd left behind by accident. The first entry was dated 3 months earlier, January 15th. It read, "Arrived today. Small house, but it'll do. Came here to escape work. Nursing has destroyed me. Need to remember who I was before the hospital consumed everything." I felt my stomach drop. That could have been my exact words. I kept reading. The entries described someone's solo beach vacation in detail. Waking up at 8:30, making scrambled eggs, walking on the beach, reading, going to bed early. Normal stuff, except every single detail matched what I'd planned to do. Same wake-up time, same breakfast, same evening routine. I told myself it was coincidence. Lots of people come to beach houses to decompress. Lots of nurses burn out. But the entries kept going, and they got specific. Day 3 couldn't sleep. Kept hearing the house settle. Sounds like footsteps. Logical brain knows it's just wood expanding and contracting. But anxiety brain won't shut up. I hadn't slept well my first 2 nights either. I'd heard those same sounds. Same interpretation. I flipped ahead, my hands shaking now, and found an entry from what would have been the previous guest's day 7. Went into town for groceries. Bought chicken, rice, those pre-made salads. Ate on the deck and watched the sunset. It was orange and purple. First time I felt calm in months. I hadn't gone into town yet. This was only my 2nd day, but I had planned to go tomorrow. And I had planned to buy exactly those things because they were easy and I didn't want to think about cooking. I looked at the next entry. Day 8 started having weird dreams. Dreaming about someone finding this journal. Dreaming about someone reading these words. She looks tired, so tired. I want to tell her it doesn't help. Coming here doesn't fix anything. My vision blurred. I flipped to the last page of the journal where the entries ended. The date was listed as day 14, tomorrow. Just one word followed by a detailed paragraph. Tomorrow I'll die. Not suicide. I won't do that. But I'll die anyway. They'll find me face down in the shallow water near the rocks. No signs of struggle. No water in my lungs. The autopsy won't explain it. My family will call it accidental drowning. But it won't be an accident. It'll be a choice I didn't know I was making. Sophia, if you're reading this, don't go in the water. Don't let it call you. It sounds like peace, but it's not. It's something else. Something that's been waiting. The journal knew my name. My name. I dropped it like it had burned me and backed out of the bathroom. I should have left right then, grabbed my keys and driven away. But I didn't. I stood there in that beach house trying to apply logic to something that made no sense. Maybe someone had been stalking me. Maybe someone knew I'd rented this place and planted the journal as a sick joke. Maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. I went through every rational explanation and none of them fit. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, the journal on the coffee table in front of me, and I tried to decide what to do. At dawn I heard it, a voice from outside, soft and familiar. My own voice, calling to me from the direction of the water. Sophia, come here. It's okay now. You can rest now. I looked out the window and saw myself standing at the water's edge. Same pajamas I was wearing, same exhausted posture. She was looking back at the house, looking right at me, and she was smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in years. I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't pack. I didn't close the door behind me. I got in my car and drove for 6 hours straight until I was home. I called the rental company and told them I'd had an emergency. They were annoyed but processed the refund. I went back to work the next week, still exhausted, still broken, but alive. That was 2 months ago. Yesterday I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a black composition notebook. Brand new, empty except for one entry on the first page, dated tomorrow. It reads, "Arrived today. Small house, but it'll do. Came here to escape work. Nursing has destroyed me. Need to remember who I was before the hospital consumed everything." It's in my handwriting.
I've been doing property inspections for 20 years. I've seen it all. Houses built on faulty foundations, mold infestations that would make your skin crawl, electrical systems that were basically fire hazards waiting to happen. Nothing surprises me anymore, or it didn't until I got the call about the Sanderson Beach house. The property was being sold as part of an estate settlement, and the lawyer handling it needed a full inspection before listing. Standard stuff. I showed up on a Tuesday morning with my clipboard and my gear, expecting a straightforward job. The house was old, built in the 1950s. Classic Cape Cod style, with weathered shingles and a view of the Atlantic. I started my usual routine. Foundation, roof, electrical, plumbing. Everything was dated but functional. The owner had clearly maintained it well before passing. I was making notes about some minor water damage in the upstairs bathroom when I noticed something odd on the floor plan the lawyer had provided. It showed a basement access, but I hadn't seen any basement door. I'd been through the whole first floor twice. I called the lawyer. She sounded confused. She said there was definitely supposed to be a basement, that the property records listed it, but she'd never been down there herself. She suggested checking again. I went through the house, room by room, and finally found it. Behind the water heater in the utility closet was a door, painted the same color as the walls, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. It didn't have a handle, just a small indentation where you could hook your fingers and pull. I opened it and found stairs leading down into darkness. The stairs themselves were wrong. They were wood, which was normal enough, but they seemed to descend farther than they should. A basement should be maybe 10 feet down, 12 at most. These stairs kept going. I counted 20 steps before I reached the bottom, and when I did, my flashlight beam revealed something impossible. The basement was filled with sand. Not a little sand blown in through cracks. Filled with it. Like someone had dumped tons of beach sand into a fully finished basement, filling it nearly to the ceiling joists. There was maybe 3 feet of clearance between the sand surface and the ceiling. I stood there trying to make sense of it. Why would anyone fill a basement with sand? Was it some kind of foundation issue? Some engineering solution I wasn't familiar with, but the sand wasn't just dumped randomly. It was smooth, level, like it had been carefully graded. And there were things in it. Objects partially buried, sticking up through the surface. I walked across the sand, my boots sinking in with each step, and started examining what I could see. A wallet, a cell phone, a set of car keys, a watch. All of them looked old, weathered, but not ancient. Modern objects, maybe from the last few decades. I dug out the wallet and opened it. Driver's license inside, expired. From 2003. I didn't recognize the name, but the address was local. I pulled out the phone, an old flip phone model from the early 2000s. The keys were attached to a rental car tag. I kept digging and found more. Dozens of personal items, all scattered through this sand basement like artifacts in an archaeological dig. Sunglasses, jewelry, a child's toy, all things that people might have lost on the beach. But why were they here? Why were they buried in this basement? That's when I found my own item. My flashlight beam caught something metallic, and I reached down and pulled it out. It was a pocket knife, distinctive because it had initials carved into the handle. My initials, J.M. Jack Morrison. My grandfather had given it to me when I was 12 years old, and I'd lost it at this very beach during a family vacation in 1985. I was 40 years old. That knife had been missing for 28 years, and here it was, buried in the sand basement of a house I'd never entered before today. My hands started shaking. I looked around the basement with new eyes, and I noticed something else. The sand wasn't still. It was moving very slightly, shifting in patterns like something underneath was redistributing. I heard a sound then, a grinding sound, like stone on stone, coming from deeper in the sand. I backed toward the stairs, my flashlight swinging wildly, and I saw the sand near the far wall begin to rise. Something was pushing up from underneath, creating a mound that grew taller as I watched. I ran, dropped my gear and ran up those stairs as fast as I could move. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not my footsteps. Other footsteps, following me up from the sand. Multiple sets, moving in rhythm, getting closer. I reached the top and slammed the door shut, and immediately heard pounding from the other side. Rhythmic, insistent, like fists on wood. I shoved the water heater in front of the door and got out of that house. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, trying to calm down, trying to find a rational explanation. I called the lawyer and told her there was a serious problem with the property, that the basement was structurally unsound and potentially dangerous. I didn't mention the sand or the lost objects or the footsteps. I just said she needed to get a specialist involved before proceeding with the sale. She thanked me and asked me to send my report. I sent a brief summary citing structural concerns and recommended the property be inspected by a geological engineer. Then I went home and tried to forget about it, but 2 weeks later, I was working on a different property, a house about 30 miles down the coast, and while I was checking the crawl space, I found something that made my heart stop. A business card wedged between 2 floor joists. My business card with my name and contact information, but it wasn't aged or dirty like something that had been there for a while. It was pristine, like it had just been placed there. On the back, someone had written in pencil, "You left something in the sand. It's still waiting for you." I haven't been back to that beach. I haven't accepted any inspection jobs in that county. But last month, I was jogging near my home, 30 miles inland, nowhere near the ocean, and I stepped wrong and felt something shift under my foot. I looked down and saw I was standing on sand. Not dirt, not gravel. Beach sand. Just a small patch, maybe 2 feet across, in the middle of the jogging path. I crouched down and touched it, and it was cold, colder than it should have been. And when I pulled my hand back, there was something in my palm that I'd pulled out of that sand. My grandfather's pocket knife. The same one I'd found in the basement. The same one I'd dropped when I ran away. It was back. And somehow the sand was back to the sand that takes things, the sand that gives them back, the sand that's following me home.
My daughter thought the beach house would be perfect for a family vacation. And honestly, I was thrilled. 3 generations under one roof for a whole week. My son-in-law Tom, my daughter Rachel, and my 2 precious grandchildren, Emma and Lucas. Those kids are my whole world, 7 and 9 years old, still young enough to think their grandmother hung the moon. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and the first thing the children wanted to do was explore the beach. Of course they did. That's what you do at the ocean. The house sat right on a rocky stretch of coastline, the kind where tide pools form in the spaces between boulders. Beautiful, really. Clear water trapped in natural basins, full of starfish and tiny crabs and anemones that close up when you touch them. Emma and Lucas were enchanted immediately. They spent the entire first day crouched beside one particular pool, the largest one, about 50 feet from the house. I sat on the deck with my knitting and watched them poke around with sticks, shrieking with delight every time they found a new creature. It made my heart full, but on the second day, I noticed something odd. The children weren't just playing at the tide pool anymore. They were talking to it. I could hear their voices carrying on the wind, these animated conversations, but I couldn't hear anyone responding. When I walked down to check on them, they both looked up at me with these bright, excited faces. Emma told me they'd made new friends who lived in the pool. I smiled, thinking it was make-believe, the kind of imaginative play children that age love. I asked what their friends' names were. Lucas said they didn't have names anymore, that they'd forgotten them a long time ago. That phrase chilled me a bit, but I brushed it off. Kids say strange things. That evening at dinner, I mentioned it to Rachel and Tom. They laughed it off, said the kids were just being creative. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The way Emma and Lucas had looked at that tide pool wasn't playful. It was focused, devoted almost. After dinner, I watched from the window as the tide came in, swallowing the pool completely, and I saw both children standing at the water's edge, staring out at the exact spot where the pool had been. They stood there for 20 minutes, not moving until Tom called them inside for bedtime. The third day, I made an excuse to go down to the tide pool with them. I needed to see what they were doing. The tide was out again, and the pool had returned, and my grandchildren went straight to it like they were being summoned. They knelt at the edge and started speaking in these soft, earnest voices. I got close enough to hear what they were saying, and my blood went cold. They were speaking in perfect unison, both of them, saying the exact same words at the exact same time. "We'll come back. We promise. We'll always come back." Over and over, like a prayer. I looked into the pool, trying to see what they were looking at. Just rocks and water and small sea creatures. Nothing unusual. But then I caught our reflection on the water's surface, and I saw something that made my knees weak. In the reflection, behind Emma and Lucas, there were 2 other children. Small, pale, standing so close they seemed to be overlapping with my grandchildren's reflection. I jerked my head up to look behind us. Nothing there, just empty beach. But when I looked back at the water, those other children were still there in the reflection, and they were smiling. I grabbed Emma and Lucas by their shoulders and pulled them away from the pool. They both screamed, actually screamed like I was hurting them. They fought against me, trying to get back to the water, crying and begging me to let them go back to their friends. I'd never seen them act like this. Never. I dragged them up to the house and told Rachel and Tom that something was wrong, that the children needed to stay away from that tide pool. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Tom said I was being overprotective. Rachel suggested I was tired and should take a nap. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those reflections, those pale children who existed only in the water's surface. Around midnight, I got up to get some water and happened to glance out the kitchen window. Both Emma and Lucas were outside, walking across the beach in their pajamas, heading straight for the tide pool. I didn't even think. I ran outside in my nightgown and bare feet and caught up with them just as they reached the water's edge. They were both sound asleep, sleepwalking, but with their eyes open, and they were saying those words again in unison. "We promise. We'll always come back." I tried to wake them, shaking them gently, calling their names. Nothing worked. They kept walking forward, right into the water, and I had to physically restrain them, wrapping my arms around their waists and pulling them backward. They thrashed and screamed in their sleep, their voices overlapping, and then they said something in a language I didn't recognize. It sounded old, ancient almost, like words carved in stone. And then they said, in English, perfectly synchronized, "They remember you now, Violet. They remember your voice." That broke the spell somehow. Both children went limp in my arms and woke up crying, confused about why they were outside, why they were wet. I carried them back to the house, and this time I didn't care if Rachel and Tom thought I was crazy. I told them we were leaving. First thing in the morning, we were packing up and going home. Rachel tried to argue, but I think she saw something in my face that scared her. We left at dawn. Before we drove away, I went back to the tide pool one last time. I needed to understand. The tide was out, and the pool was there, perfectly still. I looked into the water, and in the reflection I saw them. 4 children now, the 2 pale ones I'd seen before, and behind them, faint but growing clearer, 2 others that looked heartbreakingly like Emma and Lucas. They were waving. I haven't taken my grandchildren to the beach since. And 3 weeks ago, a letter arrived at my house. No return address, just a single photograph inside. It was that tide pool, and in the water's reflection, those 4 children were still there. On the back, someone had written in a child's handwriting, "They keep their promises." Do you? Film photography is dying, which is precisely why I love it. There's something honest about images captured on silver halide, something digital sensors can't replicate. That's why I spent 2 weeks at the beach house last October, shooting exclusively on 35mm black and white film. My project was simple photograph, the same coastal landscape at different times of day, different weather conditions, different tides. Document the subtle changes that happen when you actually pay attention. The beach house had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean, perfect for the kind of observational work I wanted to do. I shot 12 rolls in the first week: dawn, noon, sunset, midnight. I photographed the water, the rocks, the sky. I bracketed exposures, experimented with long shutter speeds, filled frame after frame with variations on the same view. At night, I'd develop the film in the bathroom I'd converted to a makeshift darkroom, watching images emerge in the chemical baths. Watching reality assert itself from blank paper. It's meditative, almost spiritual. That's when I noticed the figures. They appeared in the background of several shots, blurred and indistinct. At first I thought they were lens flares or development errors. But they showed up consistently, always in the same general position, standing between the camera and the ocean. The strange thing was, I also shot digital photos as backups, and the figures never appeared in the digital versions. Only in the film, only in the analog images that took time to reveal themselves. I told myself it was a quirk of the film stock, maybe something wrong with the chemicals. I kept shooting. By the second week, the figures were becoming clearer. Still blurred, but I could make out general shapes now. Human shapes, 3 of them standing at different distances from the house, all facing inward, all facing toward the windows where I was shooting from. I checked my negatives obsessively, looking for scratches or contamination that might explain it. nothing. The figures were part of the image, captured at the moment of exposure. They'd been there when I took the photos. I just hadn't seen them. I started shooting faster, more frantically. I'd take a photo, then immediately step outside to look at the beach to see if anyone was there. The beach was always empty, but when I developed the film, the figures were always present, getting clearer, getting closer. In one frame, I could make out details. One of them wore clothes that looked wet. Another had long hair that hung straight down. The third was smaller, child-sized maybe. They stood in positions that should have blocked my view of the ocean. But in reality, my view was always unobstructed. They existed only in the photographs, only in the developed images, only in the time between exposure and revelation. On my 13th night, I developed a roll I'd shot that afternoon. Normal coastal shots, sunset over water, nothing unusual in the viewfinder when I'd taken them. But when the images emerged in the developer bath, I nearly dropped the tray. The figures weren't on the beach anymore. They were at the window, pressed against the glass. I could see their faces now, or where their faces should have been. Blurred features, eyes that were just dark hollows, mouths open like they were calling out something I couldn't hear. And they were reaching toward the camera, toward me, their hands flat against the glass. I checked the windows immediately. Nothing there. No handprints, no marks, no evidence anyone had ever touched the glass. But the photographs didn't lie. I had images showing these things right at the window, close enough to touch. I shot another roll immediately. Same angle, same window. I took the photos from inside the house, pointing the camera at the very windows where the figures had appeared. I developed the film with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The new photos showed them inside, behind me. In the reflection of the windows, I could see the room behind the camera, and in that reflection were the three figures. Standing in the house, standing where I had been standing when I took the photos. And the details were crystal clear now. I could see their faces. I could see that they were looking at the camera, looking at me through the camera, through the film, through time itself. And I recognized one of them. One of the faces was mine. My face, but wrong. Eyes too dark, mouth too wide, wet hair hanging lank, like I'd drowned and come back. I left that night, packed my cameras and my remaining film, and drove back to the city. I destroyed every negative, every print, every image I'd captured at that beach house, threw them in a fire and watched them curl and blacken. I told myself it was over. But 2 days ago, I was organizing my studio and found a canister of film I'd missed, unlabeled. I don't remember shooting it, but it was clearly from the beach house, same film stock I'd been using. I should have thrown it away. I should have destroyed it like the others. But I'm a photographer. I had to know what was on it. I developed it this morning. The entire roll was photos of me, sleeping in the beach house bed, sitting at the kitchen table, standing in the darkroom, all taken from inside the rooms with me, from angles that would have required someone to be standing right there next to me. The final frame was different. It was a photo taken from outside the house, looking in through the window at me sleeping. But in the foreground, between the camera and the window, was me. Another me, wet-haired, dark-eyed, watching myself sleep. And on the back of the print, written in what looked like chemical stains, just one word, developing.
Look, I'm the one who planned the reunion, so technically what happened is my fault. My family hadn't all been together in 5 years, not since my grandmother passed, and I thought it would be nice to do a week at the beach. Neutral territory, you know. Somewhere nobody had any baggage or old arguments associated with. I found a rental online that seemed perfect. Big enough for all 12 of us, right on the water, available for the exact dates we needed. The listing was new, 0 reviews, which explained why it was reasonably priced. I booked it immediately. Best decision I'd ever made, I thought, until we actually arrived. We pulled up on Saturday afternoon for cars full of family. My parents, my 2 sisters and their husbands, my brother, my nieces and nephews. Everyone was in good spirits, excited for the vacation. I had the key code for the lockbox, and I opened the front door feeling proud of myself for organizing this whole thing. And that's when things got weird. The house was ready for us. Not just clean and ready, specifically ready for us. The dining table was set for 12, with place cards at each seat. Our names, our actual names in handwritten calligraphy. My sister Rachel picked up her place card and laughed, said maybe the rental company did this for all guests, made it feel personalized. But then my niece Emma noticed the photos, framed pictures on the mantel, covering the walls. Family photos. Our family photos. Pictures from our childhood, from family gatherings, from holidays. Photos I recognized from my parents' house, from my grandmother's albums. But they were here, in this rental house that had supposedly just been listed, in frames that looked like they'd been there for years. My dad went pale. He picked up one photo, a picture of him and my grandmother taken maybe 30 years ago, and his hands were shaking. He said this exact photo had been in my grandmother's bedroom, in her house when she died. We'd divided up her belongings and nobody could find this picture. We'd assumed it had been lost, but here it was. My mum started opening drawers in the kitchen, and she found them organized exactly the way she organized her own kitchen at home. Spatulas in one drawer, measuring cups in another, spices alphabetized in the cabinet. The same system, the same brands she used, same expiration dates on some of them. My brother went upstairs to check the bedrooms and came down looking sick. Each bedroom was decorated to match our childhood bedrooms. The bed frames, the wallpaper patterns, the posters on the walls. His room had his old Jurassic Park poster that he'd had when he was 12. My room had the exact same bookshelf I'd had in high school, with the same books on it in the same order. Rachel's room had the same mirror she'd kept in college. All things that should have been miles away in different houses, some of them things we'd thrown away years ago. But they were here, perfect replicas, or not replicas, the actual items impossibly gathered. I checked the refrigerator because I didn't know what else to do. It was fully stocked with our food, the specific brands and products each of us preferred. My dad's particular beer that you can only get from one brewery in our hometown. My mum's yogurt that she special orders online. Rachel's vegan cheese. My brother's energy drinks. All of it there, fresh, like someone had been shopping for us specifically, like someone had been studying us, like someone had been paying very close attention to our lives. We stood in the living room, all 12 of us, trying to make sense of it. Nobody wanted to say what we were all thinking. My mum suggested we leave, find a hotel, call the police. But before we could move, my youngest niece, 5 years old, spoke up. She said, "Grandma's here." We all turned to look at her. She was pointing at the hallway that led to the back of the house. She said Grandma was in the back room and wanted to show us something. My grandmother had been dead for 5 years. I was the one who walked down that hallway. Someone had to. The back room was locked. The only door in the house that was. I tried the handle and it opened under my hand, the lock clicking open like it had been waiting for me to try. Inside was what I can only describe as a shrine. Photos of all of us covering every wall. Hundreds of them. Some we recognized, some we didn't. Pictures of us at different ages, in different places, but also pictures that shouldn't exist. Pictures of family gatherings that hadn't happened yet. Me with grey in my hair standing next to people I didn't recognize. My nieces grown up, wearing wedding dresses. My parents elderly, older than they were now. Future photos, possible photos, and in the center of the room, on a table, were personal items. My dad's college ring he'd lost 20 years ago. My mom's locket she'd been buried with. Rachel's lost engagement ring. My brother's dog tags from his military service that he swore he'd left in storage. All here, all arranged like offerings. And there were other things. Hair, small bundles of hair tied with ribbon, labeled with our names. Fingernail clippings in tiny envelopes. Baby teeth. Clothing we'd lost over the years. Everything that had ever separated from our bodies, ever left our possession, collected and preserved and catalogued. My stomach turned. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some weird rental situation. Someone had been collecting pieces of us. Someone had been preparing this place. Someone had been waiting for us to arrive. I heard breathing behind me and turned to find my whole family crowded in the doorway. Staring. My dad was crying. My mum was on the phone with 911, but she wasn't getting service. None of us were. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi, like the house itself was blocking us from the outside world. My brother tried the front door. Locked. Every door locked. Every window locked from the outside somehow. We were inside, together, in a house that knew us better than we knew ourselves. That's when the voice came from the walls, from everywhere at once. My grandmother's voice, but layered, multiplied, like dozens of her speaking in unison. She said, "You're all here. Finally, all together. Like it should be. Like it was supposed to be before I left. Now we can stay this way. Now the house can keep us." The lights went out. We huddled together in the dark, and I felt the walls getting closer. Not physically moving, but somehow the space was contracting. The house was closing around us like a fist. I don't know how long we stayed there. Hours, maybe. We tried breaking windows, but they wouldn't break. Tried kicking down doors, but they held solid. And all the while, my grandmother's voice kept talking, telling us how she'd prepared this place, how she'd made sure it would be perfect for us, how we'd never have to leave, never have to be apart again. She talked about how houses remember, how they hold on to the people who love them, how she'd poured her love into this place and made it hungry for us. When dawn came, the doors unlocked. Just like that, all at once, we ran. Didn't take anything, didn't look back. We scattered to our cars and drove in different directions. We didn't call the police. What would we say? We don't talk about it. Family reunions are off the table now. But 3 months later, I got a letter forwarded from my apartment. No return address. Inside was a photo of all of us standing in front of a beach house. Not the rental we'd fled. A different house. And we looked happy. We looked like we belonged there. On the back was written in my grandmother's handwriting, "Third time's the charm. The next house will be better. The next house will be right. I'll keep trying until I get you all back. Love, Grandma." I looked up the address printed on the photo. It's a new rental listing. Available next month. Perfect for families.